Wide shot. A three-story steel windmill turning slow against a cold Montana sky. Behind it, a white Victorian farmhouse, 50 acres of pine and pasture. Every window on the ground floor plated in steel from the inside. Every eave hiding a camera. Middle shot, a dark Suburban idling at the end of the driveway. A camel cashmere coat stepping out onto the frost. A gold watch catching the porch light like a small dishonest star. Beside him, a second car. A softer man in a charcoal wool coat. The man who used to bring cookies on Saturdays. Closer now, a basement door. A spiral staircase of black steel descending 40 feet into the earth. 6 monitors glowing blue against concrete walls. A 23-year-old woman in blue nurse scrubs with her back to the wall. Her hand hovers over a red button under clear plastic. Behind her, 40 feet away, a steel safe room. Inside it, a stuffed rabbit. Inside that, a 5-year-old girl whispering a special sentence her sister taught her 90 minutes ago. The boots on the stairs are coming down. You should have just taken the 25,000, kiddo. Reese Halloran's voice came down the spiral staircase soft, the way it always came. Slow boots on steel. A man who had already decided he was going to win. I pressed my back against the cold concrete wall of my dead father's bunker. My hand hovered over a red button under a clear plastic cover. My 5-year-old sister was locked in a steel safe room 40 feet behind me, holding a stuffed rabbit named Mr. Button, whispering the special sentence I had taught her 90 minutes ago. On the 6 monitors in front of me, Emmett Vance in the driveway, cashmere coat, gold watch, and a third car at the gate whose driver I had not yet identified. 3 weeks ago, I had been Lynette Marsh, 23 years old, a nurse aide in Chicago, 12 days from eviction, chasing sleep on a hardwood floor with a 5-year-old baby sister asleep on a deflated mattress 6 feet away. 3 weeks ago, I had believed my father was a poor man who worked a night shift in Gary, Indiana. 3 weeks ago, I had believed my mother had died of pneumonia. Reese took another step. I did not press the button. Not yet. Because I was not sure any of them had earned dying tonight. And because my mother had left me 47 letters. And every one of them said the same thing in a different way. Wait, my darling. Wait until you know what you know, then decide. 2:11 in the morning. The microwave clock in the studio apartment blinked green digits at the ceiling, and the ceiling blinked back nothing. Lynette sat on the bare hardwood floor with her back against a stack of moving boxes and her knees pulled up to her chest. She had not slept for 3 nights. Not really. She had lain down. She had closed her eyes. Her body had refused. 12 days. That was what the eviction notice said. 12 days to vacate. It was taped to the inside of their refrigerator door because she did not want Poppy to see it every time the little girl walked past. Poppy was 5 years old and asleep on a deflated air mattress 6 feet away. She was curled up the way small children curl. One small fist wrapped around the ear of a stuffed rabbit named Mr. Button. Her breath came in and out. In and out. Lynette watched her chest rise. She let herself count the breaths. Because if she counted the breaths, she would not think about the mortgage. Because if she thought about the mortgage, she would break. Because if she thought about the way the bankruptcy attorney had looked at her last Tuesday when she said she could not pay the retainer, she would break. Because if she thought about her father, she would break in a way that could not be repaired by morning. So she counted breaths. 12, 13, 14. Outside on Marquette Street, a siren wailed and stopped. A dog barked. A man shouted something in a language she did not know. Chicago in the middle of the night was a city that never quite lay down. Lynette was 23 years old. She wore blue nurse aide scrubs from the double shift she had walked home from at midnight. Her feet hurt. Her back hurt. Her eyes burned in the way that eyes burn when they are refusing to close because closing would mean surrender. She pulled the last box toward her. A cheap plastic tote. The label on the side was in her own handwriting. One word. Dad. 5 months. That was how long it had been since Ellis Marsh died. He had been diagnosed with stage 4 pancreatic cancer on a Tuesday in March. He had been dead by a Friday in May. 62 days from the phone call to the funeral. He was 71. He had told her not to fly down to Gary. He had said he wanted to remember her happy. He had died in his own bed with the pastor holding his hand and a nurse from hospice sitting in the corner, and Lynette 300 miles away, holding Poppy in a hospital break room because Ellis had asked for it that way. 12 people came to the funeral. Most of them were men from the factory where he had worked the night shift for 41 years. A few old-timers from the Little Baptist Church on Marquette, his pastor, his neighbor, Lynette, Poppy in a black dress that was already too small, Reese Halloran standing at the back with his hand on Lynette's lower back. That was it. 41 years of a man's life and 12 people came to say goodbye. Lynette had held Poppy's hand through the whole thing. Poppy had asked twice where Daddy went. Heaven, Lynette told her, and meant nothing by it because she did not know what she meant by anything anymore. Her breath caught in her chest. She opened the tote. The smell hit her first. Old Spice, peppermint wrappers, newspaper, and underneath all of that, something warmer. Something that was just him, just Ellis, just her dad. Her chest cracked open in a small, quiet way. Her hand went in on its own. His reading glasses, black frames, one arm bent slightly because he had sat on them at Thanksgiving 3 years ago and refused to buy new ones. A pocket knife rusted at the hinge, a stack of crossword puzzles, half of them finished in his blocky handwriting. His time card from the factory, his last one, punched out at 6:02 in the morning on a Tuesday 3 months before the diagnosis, back when he had still been strong. Lynette held the time card for a long time, and then she saw it. At the bottom of the tote, under the crosswords, under everything, his Bible, King James, bonded leather, faded gold lettering worn almost to nothing on the front cover. She remembered him carrying it to church every Sunday for as long as she had been alive, his big, rough hands cradling it like something precious. Because to him it was. Ellis Marsh did not talk much about his faith. He just lived it, every Sunday without fail, every night before bed whispering the same prayer with her when she was small. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. Lynette had not been to church since she was 15. She lifted the Bible out of the tote, heavier than she remembered. She pressed it to her chest, closed her eyes, and then for the first time in 8 years, she whispered the only prayer she could remember. Dad, I don't know how to fix this. The apartment did not answer. Chicago did not answer. Anything else that might have been listening did not answer either. She was so tired. Her hands trembled. The Bible slipped. It hit the hardwood floor with a sound like a gunshot loud enough that Poppy stirred, mumbled something in her sleep, and turned over. Lynette gasped, dropped to her knees, reached for the Bible. Because it was his. Because it was the only piece of him she had left. Except it was already broken. The spine had split right down the middle. The bonded leather had torn along the seam and pages were fanning out in every direction. Lynette's throat closed. She lifted the Bible carefully, started to press the pages back together, and then she noticed. The spine was not just torn, it was hollow. Lynette froze. She turned the Bible over, slow, careful, squinting in the dim green light of the microwave clock. Behind the leather, behind the inner binding, something was pressed against the hollow of the spine, something that should not have been there. An envelope, yellowed, folded tight to fit the narrow space, sealed with dried wax that had cracked with age. Her heart began to pound in her ears. She reached in with 2 fingers, pried the envelope loose. The old glue tore away with a soft whisper. She sat back on her heels. Ellis Marsh, sheet metal worker, 41 years on the night shift, 2-bedroom apartment, owned nothing but a used truck and his Bible. Why would a man who owned nothing hide something so carefully? Lynette broke the wax with her thumb, unfolded the envelope, pulled out the papers inside. The first thing she saw was the state seal, Montana, in faded blue ink. Below it in bold typewriter font from another decade 3 words, warranty deed. She blinked, rubbed her eyes, read again. This warranty deed made this 12th day of March 1985 by and between the grantor, Josiah Merrick, and the grantee, Ellis Marsh. She scanned down, her breath caught. Property description, 50 acres of timbered pasture land in Flathead County, Montana, including 1 residential farmhouse, 2 barns, 1 detached garage, and a three-story steel windmill known locally as Silverbrook Farm. The room started to tilt. 50 acres, a farmhouse, a three-story steel windmill. Her father, her father, who lived in a one-bedroom rental in South Chicago for as long as she could remember. Who ate canned soup because it was cheap? Who wore flannel shirts until the elbows gave out? Who told her when she was 16 and looking at community college applications that he could not help her because he did not have anything? Owned 50 acres in Montana. Lynette's hands would not stop shaking. She turned the page. A tax certificate. Property taxes paid in full every single year, consistently, through something called the Meadowlark Trust. Anonymous, blind. The last payment had been made on March 3rd of this year, 3 weeks before her father's diagnosis, 2 months before he died. Lynette sat there holding the deed, her mind refusing to make sense of what she was seeing, because it did not make sense, because Ellis Marsh did not lie, because if her father had money, he would have used it. Unless he could not, unless he was hiding it for a reason. She turned to the last page. Tucked behind the deed, a photograph, black and white, the edges soft from age. In the picture, a young man and a young woman stood in front of a big white Victorian farmhouse on a hill. And behind the farmhouse, rising into the sky like a small industrial cathedral, a three-story steel windmill. Its blades caught mid-turn. Its tower painted a color she could not read in black and white. The man was tall, broad-shouldered, his hair dark and thick. He was smiling in a way Lynette had never seen her father smile. The woman beside him had her hand on her belly. Pregnant, maybe 6 months along. She was laughing. Lynette knew that laugh. She had not heard it in 15 years. Mom. The tears came before she knew they were coming, hot and silent. Ivy Marsh. Dead since Lynette was 8 years old. Dead of pneumonia. Her father had told her. Complications. Nothing anyone could have done. Except there she was in a photograph Lynette had never seen. Pregnant in front of a farmhouse in Montana. A farmhouse Lynette had never been told about. Underneath a windmill her father had never mentioned once in 23 years. And underneath the photograph, wrapped in tissue paper. One more thing. A small wooden cross, hand-carved, about the size of Lynette's palm. 2 words burned into the back with careful, deliberate strokes. Ivy. 2002, the year Lynette was born. She pressed the cross to her lips, and then she wept. The kind of weeping that shakes the whole body. The kind that has no sound. The kind that comes out of a place so deep you did not know it existed. She wept for the mother she barely knew. She wept for the father who had carried the secret alone. And somewhere in the middle of all that weeping, something shifted. Because Ellis Marsh did not lie without a reason. And a man who buried a deed inside his Bible and paid taxes on a farm for 40 years was not hiding a burden. He was leaving a door. Lynette wiped her face. Slow, deliberate. Then she stood up. Her legs felt strange, not quite hers. She walked to the window, looked out at Marquette Street. Snow was starting to fall, small flakes drifting past the streetlight like ash. Dad, what did you leave me? The streetlight flickered. She took it as an answer. At 6:22 in the morning, her phone rang. Lynette was still sitting on the floor. She had not moved. She had read the deed 9 times. She had read her mother's laugh in the photograph maybe 40. The little wooden cross sat in her palm, warm now from her skin. The phone rang and rang. She did not recognize the number. Area code 406, Montana. Her stomach dropped. She thumbed the green icon and put the phone to her ear without speaking. The voice on the other end had gone to law school somewhere expensive and had come back to a small town to talk down to people. Miss Marsh, my name is Porter Ellsworth. I am an attorney in Cedar Falls, Montana. I represented your late father. Her mouth went dry. She managed to ask how he had gotten her number, and Ellsworth answered too smoothly. Emergency contact. Old paperwork. He softened his voice into a practiced apology and slid the pitch in behind it. A small parcel of land. Environmental hazards. The county threatening condemnation. $25,000 in cash for a quick, clean transfer of the deed. A fresh start. Miss Marsh, he said. For you and your sister. Lynette closed her eyes. She had not told anyone. She had found the deed less than 4 hours ago. She had not said the words sister or Poppy to anyone in Montana. Nobody in Cedar Falls knew Poppy existed. Her question came out flat and careful. How he knew she had a sister. On the line. Long silence. Then a laugh a little too careful. Ellsworth cleared his throat and murmured something about managing her father's affairs for decades, being aware of his family. Nice recovery, Lynette thought. Not good enough. She let a beat pass before asking about the money. $25,000 for 50 acres. Another pause. Sharper this time. The land is functionally worthless. He told her. My client is offering this as a courtesy. She asked who the client was. That was not something he was at liberty to discuss. Right. She hung up. She sat there for a full minute, not moving. Then she stood up, walked to the closet, started pulling out the duffel bags. Because Ellis Marshall was many things, but he was not a fool. And a lawyer 400 miles away in a town she had never heard of did not call at 6 in the morning about a piece of land she had known existed for 4 hours unless somebody was listening. Somebody had been listening. Lynette stopped, turned very slowly. Her eyes traveled the studio apartment, the stack of boxes, the half-empty bookshelf, the coffee table Reese Halloran had bought her from a thrift store on Ashland 6 months ago because she had mentioned in passing that her old one had a wobble in the leg. The little digital alarm clock on the nightstand. The one Reese had given her the night after Ellis died. The night Reese had shown up at her door with a bag of groceries and red eyes, in a story about being her father's second cousin from Wisconsin, whom Ellis had lost touch with in the 90s and had only recently reconnected with in the last year of his life. Reese Halloran, 43 years old, soft voice, sad eyes. He had cooked her dinner. He had taken Poppy to the park on Saturdays while Lynette worked doubles. He had held her at the graveside when the pallbearers lowered her father into the ground and had whispered against her hair, "We will figure this out together, kiddo." Kiddo. He always called her kiddo. He had pressed the alarm clock into her hands and told her it had belonged to her dad, that he had thought she might want something of his by the bed. Lynette walked to the nightstand. Slow. She picked up the alarm clock, turned it over in her hand. It was heavier than it should be. A little. She got the paring knife from the kitchen drawer, pried the plastic back off. Nestled inside the plastic casing, taped to the back of the circuit board, a small black device about the size of a nickel, a tiny wire antenna coiled beside it. A listening device. Lynette stared at it for a long moment. Her chest went cold in a way that had nothing to do with the Chicago wind coming through the cracked window. 6 months. He had been listening to her for 6 months. He had heard her cry in the shower. He had heard her tell Poppy bedtime stories. He had heard the voicemail from the bank about the mortgage default. He had heard the eviction notice being read aloud when she called her cousin to ask about a couch. He had heard everything. And this morning at 4 in the morning when she had picked up the Bible and it had cracked open and she had gasped, this device had picked that up too. And 2 hours later, a lawyer in Montana had known. Lynette did not scream. She placed the alarm clock on the counter. Then she crushed the little black device under the heel of her boot, ground it into the wood floor until it was a smear of silicone and plastic. Then she walked to the deflated air mattress and knelt down. Her hand found Poppy's shoulder and shook it gently. Poppy stirred, opened one eye, squinted, a sleepy mumble about how it was still dark. Lynette lifted her, warm little body, Mr. Button dangling from a small fist. She murmured something about a trip while she carried her to the closet and pulled Poppy's little jacket off the hook one-handed. Poppy asked where they were going. Grandpa left us something in Montana. Poppy considered this with the perfect gravity of a 5-year-old. She wanted to know if it was far. Lynette told her it was very far. Then Poppy asked if Reese was coming. Lynette paused, only for a second, but she paused. Then she pressed her lips against the top of Poppy's head and told her no. Reese was not coming. Poppy did not ask why. She just buried her face in the collar of Lynette's scrubs and went back to sleep with her whole trusting weight against Lynette's shoulder. Lynette stood in the middle of her studio apartment with her baby sister on her hip and a deed to 50 acres of Montana in a manila envelope tucked into her waistband and the ashes of a listening device under her boot. She looked at the microwave clock, 6:41. She was in the car by 7:10. At 7:15, Reese Halloran knocked on her door. 3 quick knocks, then a pause, then 3 more. It was the pattern he always used because he said it was the sound he made when he did not want to scare her. Lynette knew this because he had told her. He had told her a lot of things. Lynette was not there to hear the knocks. Lynette was already on I-90 westbound with Poppy strapped into the back seat and Mr. Button on her lap and a thermos of gas station coffee going cold in the cup holder. But she found out later. From the security camera at the front door of the building, Reese stood on her doorstep for 11 minutes. He knocked. He tried the handle. He knocked again. He pulled out his phone and made a call. Whoever answered, he spoke to for a long time. His face got very still. When he hung up, he stood for another minute with one hand pressed against the door. Then he turned, walked down the hall, got in a car she had never seen, a black sedan, and drove away. Lynette did not know any of this yet. She only knew the road, the gray sky, Poppy's breathing in the back seat, and the deed pressed against her hip like a small hot animal that would not let her rest. The drive was 22 hours. She did not sleep for the first 14. She stopped in Iowa for gas at a truck stop somewhere off exit 47. She filled the tank and bought Poppy a plastic tub of goldfish crackers and a pink slushie. She ate a granola bar in the parking lot because she could not remember the last thing she had put in her mouth. Somewhere outside Lincoln, Nebraska, in the flat gray of 2 in the afternoon. Poppy woke up in the back seat and asked her a question in a voice small enough that Lynette almost missed it. "Linny, do you think Daddy can see us right now?" Lynette's hands tightened on the wheel. She thought about the deed, the photograph, the hollow spine of a Bible her father had carried to church every Sunday for 40 years, while she and her mother believed he was carrying only prayers. She said, "Yeah, baby, I think he can see us fine." Poppy nodded once, satisfied, and turned her face to the window. Somewhere in South Dakota, Lynette stopped at a Perkins because Poppy was hungry and she was starting to see after images in the corners of her eyes. She ordered Poppy pancakes and a chocolate milk. She ordered herself a hamburger she could not taste. The waitress was a woman in her 60s in a maroon apron who watched Lynette feed Poppy for a while before coming back with a slice of pie Lynette had not ordered. She set it down without comment. She patted Lynette's shoulder once on the way past. She did not say a word. Lynette ate the pie. Outside Rapid City, the sun went down. Poppy fell asleep with a blueberry syrup mustache and Mr. Button pressed against her cheek. Lynette drove through Wyoming in the dark on cheap coffee and the memory of her mother's laugh in a photograph. Every few hours, Poppy would wake up and ask another question. "Linny, where is Grandpa's house in Montana?" "Cedar Falls." "Baby, a little town called Cedar Falls." "Have you been there?" "No." "Then how do you know how to find it?" "Grandpa left me a map." Poppy thought about that for a long minute. Then she said Grandpa was smart, and Lynette's throat closed and she agreed and had to wipe her cheek with the back of her wrist so Poppy would not see. By the time they crossed into Montana, the sky had opened up wide, impossibly wide blue that went on forever with mountains rising out of the earth like they had grown there overnight. Her father had lived his whole adult life in Chicago and Gary. Gray skies, steel skies. I had chosen the gray, but he had owned this. She pulled into Cedar Falls a little after 4 in the afternoon on the second day. Population 2,847, according to the wooden sign at the edge of a town. Below the number someone had painted in careful red letters. "Welcome home." Main Street was 3 blocks long. A hardware store, a diner called Millie's, a white clapboard church with a steeple, a gas station where the pumps looked like they had not been updated since the 70s. Lynette parked in front of the county assessor's office. She looked at Poppy in the rearview mirror. She told her they had to go inside for a minute and it would be quick. Poppy nodded solemnly and unbuckled herself and slid down from the booster seat like a small, serious diplomat on a state visit. They walked in together, Lynette holding the deed in a folder against her chest, Poppy holding Mr. Button against hers. The woman behind the counter was in her 60s, iron gray hair pinned in a bun, reading glasses on a chain. She was stamping something and offered a distracted greeting without looking up. Lynette slid the deed across the counter and asked, "Ma'am, could she please help verify a property?" Her father had recently passed. She had found this in his belongings. The woman glanced down, read the top line. Then she stopped. Her hand hovered over the stamp. She read again, slower. Then she looked up. Her face had gone the color of old paper. "You're Ellis Marsh's girl." Lynette's breath caught. She nodded. "Lord in heaven." The woman pressed a hand to her mouth. She stared at Lynette for a long moment. Then her eyes dropped to Poppy, widened again. Then her eyes came back up. "You have your mother's eyes." Lynette's heart tripped in her chest. Before she could form the question that was rising, she heard herself ask if the woman had known her mother. The front door opened before the woman could answer. The bell tinkled. Cold air rushed in, and a tall man in a camel-colored cashmere coat walked into the tiny county office. Silver hair slicked back, a gold watch on his wrist. He looked like he had walked out of a Manhattan boardroom and gotten lost. The woman behind the counter stiffened. Her hand slid subtle but fast over the top of the deed. She greeted him by name, "Mr. Vance," voice flat. He returned the greeting in a single word, "Dorothea," and smiled, very white teeth. Then he turned to Lynette. His eyes did something, like a hunter spotting movement in the trees. "And you must be Miss Marsh." Lynette's spine went cold. She had not given her name. The stumble of her own question fell out before she could stop it. He answered with a small shrug and a comment about small towns and news traveling fast. He extended a hand, long-fingered, pale, the kind of hand that had never held a hammer. "Emmett Vance," he said. He owned the land adjacent to her father's property. He wished her to accept his deepest condolences. Lynette did not take the hand. She looked at Dorothea. Dorothea gave her the smallest shake of the head. Lynette reached back, picked Poppy up, settled her on her hip. Poppy stared at Vance with the unblinking gravity of a 5-year-old who had decided she did not like something. She told him it had been nice to meet him, but she needed to get her sister fed. She kept her voice level. She kept her chin up. He offered coffee, neighbor to neighbor. "Some other time," she told him. She walked out. She could feel his eyes on her back the whole way. She strapped Poppy into the car seat, started the engine. Her hands were shaking. She was pulling out when she saw movement in her rearview mirror. Dorothea, coming out the back door of the office, waving frantically. Lynette pulled around the block, parked, rolled down her window. Dorothea leaned in fast, breath fogging in the cold, voice low. She did not have long. Vance had eyes everywhere in this town, and half of them were inside her office. She pressed a small white card into Lynette's hand. "Odessa Fenn, Willow Street, third house on the left, blue shutters." Lynette was to tell her that Dorothea had sent her. She was to tell her she was Ivy's girl. Odessa would know. Lynette started to say she did not understand. Dorothea squeezed her hand hard enough to interrupt her. Her mama had been the finest friend Dorothea had ever had, and her daddy had sent Dorothea a Christmas card every single year for 15 years after she was gone. Same card, same words. "Watch over the town." That was all he ever wrote. He had been watching over them the whole time. "Sweetheart, now let them watch over her. Go to Odessa. Now." Dorothea turned and hurried back toward the office. Lynette sat in the running car with the white card in her palm. Poppy's small voice came from the back seat. She wanted to know if that lady was their friend. Lynette closed her fingers around the card. She told her sister she thought she was. Odessa Fenn was 68 years old and 5'2" and had the eyes of someone who had seen a war and won. She opened her front door wearing a green flannel shirt and jeans, silver hair pulled back tight, reading glasses pushed up on her forehead. In her right hand, a wooden spoon dripping with something that smelled like beef stew. She took one look at Lynette standing on her porch. The wooden spoon fell out of her hand. "Ivy." Her voice was barely a whisper. She stepped forward and pulled Lynette into her arms before Lynette could even try to explain who she was. Lynette had not been hugged like that in a very long time. Her whole body just gave, like something inside her had been holding a door shut for months, and this small, fierce grandmother had walked up and simply pushed it open. She started to cry. Odessa held her tighter and murmured that it was all right. Honey, she was home now. Poppy stood on the porch behind them, holding Mr. Button, watching. She reached up and tugged Odessa's flannel shirt with a small, serious hand and asked if Odessa was her grandma. Odessa looked down at her. The smile that came was worn in at the edges the way a saddle is worn in. She was now, baby. She was now. That night, Lynette sat at Odessa Fenn's kitchen table drinking coffee out of a mug that said, "World's okayest nurse," and listened to Odessa talk about her mother for the first time in 15 years. Odessa had served as a combat nurse at a military hospital in Germany for 18 years. She had come home to Cedar Falls in 1988. She had met Ivy in the summer of 1993, when Ivy was still traveling constantly for work and only in Cedar Falls a few months at a time. When Ivy was in town, Odessa said, the two of them were inseparable. Ivy had been fire, just fire in a small package. Lynette asked what her mother had been doing here. Odessa's eyes flickered. She said that was a conversation for when Lynette was rested. Right now, Lynette was to eat this stew and sleep. Lynette ate the stew. Odessa refilled the mug without asking and put a blanket over Lynette's shoulders and made up the guest bed with hospital corners so tight the sheets could have bounced a quarter. She tucked Poppy in beside her sister and stood in the doorway for a long moment with her arms crossed over her stomach, the way a woman stands when she has been waiting 15 years to see something she was not sure she would live to see. Then she flicked off the light and closed the door. Lynette slept for the first time in a week. Somewhere in the middle of the night, she dreamed of her mother. Ivy was standing on a hill, wind in her hair, pointing at something in the distance. "Look, baby, look where your daddy left you." Lynette woke up at dawn with tears on her face. Silverbrook Farm sat at the end of an unpaved road that wound 4 miles up into the foothills of the Rockies. Lynette drove slowly, Poppy in the back, Odessa in the passenger seat with a thermos of coffee in her lap. Her daddy had cut this road himself in '87. Odessa told her. Him and her Frank. Lynette asked who Frank was. Her husband. Gone 12 years. Lynette said she was sorry. Odessa nodded, said nothing else. The road ended at a rusted wrought iron gate. Chained. Rusted. Except the padlock on the chain was brand new. Bright silver. Not a scratch on it. Someone had been here recently. But the chain itself was already cut. Sliced clean through. Then hung back up to look intact. Lynette looked at Odessa. Odessa's jaw was tight. Vance's people. 2 flat words. Lynette got out, pushed the gate open, got back in the car. They drove a 1/4 mile up the driveway. The trees broke, and there it was. The house from the photograph. The white Victorian farmhouse. 3 stories, a steep gabled roof, a wraparound porch, standing on a hill overlooking 50 acres of golden pasture and pine forest. And behind it, rising out of the earth like a cathedral of iron and wind, the 3-story steel windmill. Its blades caught the morning light and turned once. Slow. Behind everything, the Rocky Mountains rose up like something God had drawn in a moment of showing off. Lynette stopped the car. She could not breathe. She got out slowly, walked toward the house, Poppy's small hand in hers. Up close, she saw them. The steel plates bolted to the inside of every ground floor window, only visible when you got close. The reinforced front door. Solid steel underneath the wood facing, the kind of door you put on a vault. The security cameras, high definition, mounted discreetly under the eaves, their red lights blinking in slow, steady rhythm. Recording her right now, Lynette walked up the porch steps. A keypad next to the door, old-style metal numbers, worn from use. She looked at it for a long moment, then she typed 0, 9, 2, 3, 2, 0, 0, 2. Her birthday. The lock clicked. A heavy deadbolt slid back with a deep, satisfying clunk. Lynette pushed the door open. The house exhaled. Warm air. Clean. Dry air. The smell of cedar and old paper and faintly, Old Spice. She stepped inside. The lights came on automatically. The entryway opened into a great room with hardwood floors and a stone fireplace and leather furniture that looked like someone had just gotten up to make coffee. A book on the side table, a pair of reading glasses on top of the book. His reading glasses, the pair with the bent arm. Lynette made a sound that was not quite a word. Odessa took Poppy's hand and murmured something about finding the kitchen. They disappeared down the hall. Lynette stood alone in her father's house. Her father's house, which she had never known existed until 40 hours ago. She walked slowly, touching things: the back of a leather chair, the mantel of the fireplace, a framed photograph on the wall of a younger Ellis standing beside a horse. Ellis had ridden horses. She had not known that. She wandered into the hallway and stopped. The walls were covered in framed photographs, hundreds of them. She was in every one. Lynette at 5 years old, feeding ducks at Lincoln Park. Lynette at 9, standing outside her elementary school in a red coat. Lynette at 15, awkward and thin at her freshman homecoming. Lynette at 20 in her nurse aide graduation gown. Lynette holding a newborn Poppy taken through the window of her old apartment. Poppy's first day of kindergarten taken from across the street. Lynette at her father's funeral, taken from a distance. Some of the photographs had dates in her father's careful handwriting. The earliest was 2003. The most recent was March 2024, 2 months before he died. Lynette walked down the hall in a trance, fingertips brushing frame after frame. Her whole life, watched, documented, cataloged, not out of obsession, out of vigilance. Her father had been guarding her from a distance for 23 years. She reached the end of the hall, and there on a small side table sat a Bible, different from the one in Chicago. This one was open, placed carefully, facing the doorway, like it had been waiting for her, open to Psalm 91. She stepped closer. A slip of paper was tucked between the pages, and on top of the paper, a small brass key. She lifted the key, unfolded the paper. She recognized the handwriting immediately. Lynette, my girl. If she had made her way here, that meant he was gone. Not to be afraid. The truth was waiting for her. Look beneath the wedding car in the garage. She would need to be strong now, for herself and for Poppy. He loved her more than he had ever known how to say. Always, Dad. Lynette pressed the paper to her mouth. Outside, somewhere in the pines, a crow called. And through the walls of the house, faint but certain, she heard the sound of Poppy laughing in the kitchen. Odessa's low, warm voice underneath it. 2 generations of women she barely knew, filling the quiet with something almost like a family. Lynette closed her eyes. Dad, what did you leave me? The wind moved through the pines outside. The Bible lay open on the table, and the key was warm in her hand. The garage stood 40 feet from the main house behind a wall of pine trees. Weathered siding. A single door on the side. Lynette held the brass key in her fist so tightly the ridges cut into her palm. Odessa had taken Poppy into town. Millie's diner. Pancakes. A whole plate of them. Odessa had promised, with the good kind of butter and blueberry syrup in a booth by the window. Odessa had winked at Lynette over the little girl's head and told her to take whatever time she needed. 2 hours. That was what Lynette had. 2 hours to find out what her father had been hiding for 40 years. She walked across the wet grass. The morning air smelled like pine and cold stone. Somewhere in the distance, a hawk cried once. Behind her, the 3-story steel windmill turned slowly in the wind. Its blades made a soft, rhythmic sound she had already started to hear, the way you hear a heartbeat. Present, unnoticed, constant. She reached the garage. The brass key turned in the lock with a smooth click. She pushed the door open. The smell hit her first. Motor oil, old leather, and underneath that faint whisper of Old Spice again. She flicked on the light, and her breath caught. In the center of the garage, under a canvas tarp, sat a car. Lynette walked toward it slowly, reached out, pulled the tarp back. A 1968 Chevrolet Impala, deep blue, polished until it shone. She knew this car, because in her mother's photograph, this exact car was parked in the driveway behind them. Ivy and Ellis, 20-something and in love, standing in front of the Victorian farmhouse with the wedding car behind them. The wedding car. Lynette pressed her hand flat against the hood. The metal was cool. The car smelled clean. Someone had been maintaining it for 4 decades. The keys were still in the ignition. Ellis Marsh did not lie, and he did not leave things to chance. She knelt down, cheek almost to the concrete floor. She looked under the car. At first, nothing, just the underside of an old car. Except except the exhaust pipe on the driver's side had a strange bracket welded to it. Handmade, not factory. Lynette reached under, fingers finding the bracket. It moved. A handle. She gripped it. Pulled. Nothing. She pulled harder. Something inside the concrete floor clicked. A slow mechanical groan. The sound of a chain slipping over a sprocket somewhere below her feet. Lynette scrambled back on her heels. The car began to move. The entire Impala. All 2 tons of it, sliding backwards on hidden steel rails embedded in the garage floor. Her father had cut these rails himself. She could tell. The welding was rough, practical, the kind of work a man does alone at night when he cannot afford to hire anyone he cannot trust. 3 feet, 6 feet, 9 feet. It stopped, where the car had been, a hole, a perfectly rectangular opening in the concrete, 6 feet by 4 feet, and a spiral staircase of black steel descending into the ground. Lynette sat back on her heels. Dad, what did you do? The air coming up out of the hole was cool, dry, faintly electric. She stood up. Her legs did not feel like her own. Then she started down. The stairs went deeper than she expected. 20 feet, 25. The walls were smooth concrete, reinforced. Lights flickered on automatically. Motion sensors, recessed LED panels. At the bottom, a heavy steel door, a keypad next to it. Lynette typed her birthday. The door hissed, slid open, and Lynette stepped into a room that should not have existed. Long, wide, twice the size of her Chicago apartment. The walls were lined with server racks, their little lights blinking in green and blue constellations. Along one wall, 6 monitors were mounted floor to ceiling, live camera feeds, every corner of the property. She saw herself standing right there, in real time, on monitor number 3, on the far wall, a topographical map of Flathead County, red pins scattered across it, 30-something. She did not count. In the center of the room, a metal desk, a leather chair, a brass banker's lamp, and on the desk, a manila envelope, her name written across the front in her father's handwriting. Lynette's knees almost gave out. She sat down in the leather chair. The chair was worn in the seat, in the exact shape of a man's body. Her father had sat here many times, for hours. She reached for the envelope. Her hand was shaking. She opened it. Inside was a stack of paper. On top a letter, written by hand, in blue ink. She began to read. Lynette, my girl. If she was reading this letter, he was gone. And he was so sorry, so very sorry. He owed her the truth, all of it, 23 years of it. Every lie he had ever told her was to keep her alive. That did not make the lies smaller, but it was the reason. He had not been a sheet metal worker. He had punched a clock in Gary for 41 years. That was true, but it had also been a cover. Lynette, for 4 decades he had worked as a forensic auditor, contracted to a federal task force whose name he still could not write down. His job had been to trace the money, to follow the paper trail of criminal enterprises that hid themselves inside legal corporations, mining operations, chemical companies, shell after shell. He had been good at it. And her mother, Lynette, her mother had been even better. Lynette stopped reading, pressed her hand flat over the page, squeezed her eyes shut. Because her mother, she kept reading. Ivy had been a field operative, recruited by the same agency in 1979 when she was 20. She had found him in 1984 in a diner in Michigan City. She had been sent to evaluate whether he could be brought into the work. She had sat down across from him, ordered a piece of coconut cream pie, looked at him, smiled, and he had loved her before she had taken her first bite. They had been told in their line of work not to become involved with each other, so they had done it anyway. They had married in May of 1985, right here at Silverbrook, in the yard. 12 people had come. Old Odessa Fenn had caught the bouquet. He had bought this farm 2 months before the wedding, because her mother had told him she had a bad feeling about the future. She had said, Ellis, if this all goes wrong, I want a place we can disappear to. She had not usually been wrong. I had built the windmill in 1998. She would have seen it by now. 3 stories of steel, blades that turned in the wind. It looked like a working windmill. It was not. It had never pumped a drop of water. The tower was a mast. The blades hid the antenna array. Inside the base of that windmill, he had built a reverse listening post. Steel piping ran from the base down into this bunker. For 26 years, that windmill had been catching every radio signal, every satellite ping, every unencrypted phone call that came out of Emmett Vance's operation. Her mother had designed it. He had built it. It had caught more evidence than any wire they had ever run. In 2002, when Lynette was born, Ivy had chosen to step back from the field. She had wanted her daughter to have a mother who came home every night. She had loved Lynette like a woman who had waited her whole life for her, which she had. For 8 years, they had been happy. Lynette would not remember most of that. She had been too young, but they had been happy. Her father wanted her to know that. Lynette felt the tears sliding down her face and did not bother to wipe them. In the summer of 2001, her mother had started seeing things she did not like. A man named Emmett Vance had built a company called Vance Holdings. On the surface, a family agricultural operation in northwestern Montana. Ranches, timber, nothing unusual. Underneath it was something else. Vance Holdings had been one of many faces of a global mining conglomerate called Meridian Resource Group, registered in London, owned by a chain of shells that reached to Panama, to the Caymans, to a bank vault in Zurich. Meridian's specialty had been extracting rare minerals from small rural communities in ways that destroyed the land and poisoned the water and drove the local people out. Vance's assignment had been Cedar Falls. I had begun poisoning the Cedar Aquifer with arsenic runoff, small amounts, untraceable to any single source, but enough over years to make farms fail, to make cattle sick, to make babies born with problems, until families sold their land for pennies on the dollar. What he was waiting for was not the mineral itself. Though there was a deposit under this land, an unpublished vein of mixed silicates worth around $42 million, what he really wanted was the water. Lynette, this farm, this land she was sitting on, it sat directly above the last clean, unpoisoned pocket of the Cedar Aquifer. If Vance got this land, he controlled not just a fortune, he controlled the drinking water of 3 counties: Flathead, Lake, Sanders, every family, every child, every well. Her mother had figured all of this out in the spring of 2002. She had been pregnant with Lynette at the time. Yes, Lynette had known that too. She had seen the photograph in her mother's Bible. She had been 6 months along in that picture. She had been going to expose Vance quietly through the agency after Lynette was born. She had wanted to make sure her daughter came into the world before she made a move. Vance had found out first. I had not killed her. Not then. He had been too careful. He had had one of his lawyers, a young man named Porter Ellsworth, come to Ellis while her mother was in the hospital delivering her. Ellsworth had sat down at Ellis's kitchen table. He had had a folder with photographs in it. Photographs of Lynette, newborn, 2 days old, taken through the nursery window at the hospital in Kalispell. I had said, "Mr. Marsh, your wife is about to do something very unwise. My client would like her to reconsider. In exchange, my client is prepared to guarantee your daughter's safety for the next 18 years. In writing. Provided you sign this document acknowledging that Meridian Resource Group has no financial interest in your property." Ellis had signed the document. He had never told her mother. She had died 8 years later, still believing he stood beside her. I wanted Lynette to know something. He had hated himself for that signature every single day since. But he would sign it again. He would sign it 1,000 times to keep Lynette alive at 2 days old. That signature had been a false will. Ellsworth had backdated it later. It had become one of many. Her mother had lived 8 more years. She had kept building her case. She had kept talking to Odessa, kept traveling, kept working. Vance had let her, because Ellis had signed, because every time she had gotten close, someone would remind him that Lynette was coming home from school on a yellow bus, that her bedroom window faced east. I had done what he could. He had fed intelligence to his task force in scraps. He had bought this farm outright with money he could not explain to her mother. He had built the windmill. He had built this bunker. He had built a room upstairs with a steel door and a lock only she could open. In June of 2010, her mother had gone too far. She had found the Zurich accounts. She had been 3 days from a federal deposition. On June 8, 2010, Vance had had her killed. The official cause of death had been viral pneumonia. That was what the coroner had written. That was what he had told Lynette when she was 8 years old and had sat on his lap and asked him where Mommy went. It had been a lie. Lynette, my girl. Her mother had been murdered. Vance had had her poisoned. Slowly. With something that mimicked pneumonia in the lungs. Odessa had been the nurse on shift when her mother came into the Cedar Falls clinic. Odessa had done CPR for 31 minutes. Odessa had known. I had spent the last 15 years building the case to finish her work. Every dollar, every scrap of documentation, every hour of overtime had gone into this, into paying the taxes on this land, into feeding intelligence to his task force, into waiting for the moment when they would have enough to bring Vance down. He had not told her any of this because if she had known, they would have come for her. As long as she did not know, she was an ordinary girl in Chicago, not a threat, not a target. There was one more thing. In 2019, he had met a woman named Annette. She had been a clinic nurse in Gary. Kind, quiet. She had not known any of this. She had not needed to. In 2020, they had had Poppy. Annette had died in a car accident in the spring of 2023. He believed, but he could not prove, that the accident had not been an accident. Vance might have suspected he was building something. He might have wanted to remind him what he had to lose. Poppy was Lynette's sister. She was also, in every way that mattered, his last apology to her mother. She had Ivy's stubborn chin. Lynette was to watch her when she was thinking. She would see it. I was so sorry, Lynette. He was so sorry he could not give her back her mother. He was so sorry that in leaving her this letter, he was also leaving her the fight. But she had to know. My girl. She was the daughter of Ivy Marsh. She was stronger than she had ever been asked to be, and she was not alone. The people of Cedar Falls remembered her mother. They would stand with her. Everything she needed was in this room. The evidence, the names, the dates, the offshore accounts, on the encrypted drives in the desk drawer. The password was Poppy's birthday. There was a satellite phone in the second drawer. If things went bad, she was to call one number. Malcolm Ridgway. He had been her mother's handler. He was now her father's. He knew about her. He had always known. Lynette, my beautiful girl. He loved her more than he had ever known how to say. Every day, every hour. He was watching from wherever men like him ended up, and he was so proud of her. Her mother was proud of her too. Go be brave. Dad. Lynette sat in the chair for a very long time. She did not weep. Not at first. She just sat. Because something inside her was being rearranged. 23 years of one story quietly dissolving, and another story rising up in its place. Her mother had not died of pneumonia. Her father had not been a poor man. Her whole childhood had been a lie built with love. She thought of the small wooden cross carved with her mother's name. She thought of Ellis in the rented Chicago apartment, drinking coffee from a chip mug, going through offshore banking records at 3 in the morning. For 15 years. Alone. Lynette pressed her palms flat against the desk, and then she wept. She wept until the pages of the letter were spotted with tears. She wept for the mother she barely remembered. She wept for the father she had never fully known. She wept for the baby Poppy, for Annette, a woman she had never met who had been kind to a grieving man and had died on a rural highway because of it. Maybe. When she finished, she did not feel weak. She felt clean. She stood up, wiped her face with her sleeve, and she got to work. The encrypted drives were exactly where he had said, 3 of them. She entered Poppy's birthday. The drives came alive. The screens flickered on. Files began to load. Bank records, wire transfers, shell company diagrams, photographs of Vance shaking hands with men in expensive suits in hotel lobbies in Zurich, in London, in Dubai. Photographs of trucks unloading barrels of arsenic waste into an abandoned mine shaft 12 miles from Cedar Falls. A list of 47 names, county commissioners, water inspectors, 2 state senators, a judge. The name of the assistant U.S. attorney who had quietly buried an environmental investigation in 2019, all of them on Vance's payroll. She saw the names of 3 Cedar Falls residents who had died in the last 8 years, a farmer who had taken his own life after his cattle got sick, a woman who had fallen asleep at the wheel the week after she filed a complaint about the water, a young geology teacher at the high school who had drowned in 3 inches of creek water while jogging. All of them had spoken out against Vance. All of them were dead. Lynette stared at the screen. Something in her went very quiet, very still. Mom did not die of pneumonia. She closed the file, opened another, and then she stopped breathing, because on the screen was a photograph she had not expected. Palmer House Hotel, Chicago, hidden lens, probably in a lapel pin, crisp, time-stamped, March 22nd, 2024, 2 men shaking hands. One was Emmett Vance, the other was Reese Halloran. The world stopped. Lynette leaned forward, fingers gripping the edge of the desk. Her breath had left her chest and she could not seem to call it back. Reese. In March of 2024, her father had been diagnosed with stage 4 pancreatic cancer. She remembered the exact day he had called her. She had been on shift at the hospital. She had gone into the supply closet and cried for 6 minutes and then gone back to her rounds. 2 weeks after that phone call, this photograph. Vance had known Ellis was dying, and within days he had recruited Reese. Recruited him, trained him, sent him to Chicago to sit in her house, to share her couch, to hold her hand at her father's funeral in May, to smile at her across the kitchen table, to take Poppy to the playground on Saturdays, to buy her a coffee table because she had mentioned in passing that hers wobbled, to wait. Lynette scrolled through the file. Wire transfers from a shell account in the Caymans to a shell account in Delaware. $1.8 million, split into 8 payments across 16 months, all received by a company called Halloran and Marsh Estate Consulting, LLC. Halloran, sole owner, Reese Halloran. He had named his shell company after her. Something in Lynette's chest cracked in a way that was not weeping. Because Reese was not her father's second cousin from Wisconsin. Reese had never met Ellis. Reese had been paid $1.8 million to sit in a Chicago studio apartment for 6 months and listen to a 23-year-old woman cry into a couch cushion at night. Everything Reese had done for the last 6 months had been supervised by Vance. The bankruptcy paperwork he had helped her research. The eviction notice he had insisted was manageable. The bank forms he had helped her fill out for the mortgage default. The way he had gently, so gently, suggested last week that maybe she should let him take temporary custody of Poppy while she got back on her feet. All of it engineered, all of it aimed at one goal, to break her financially, so that when Ellis died and she inherited Silverbrook, she would be desperate enough, broken enough, small enough, to take $25,000 and sign the deed away. Lynette put her face in her hands. Something was happening in her chest. It felt like something was cracking open. Like an egg, like a seed, like something that had been sealed for a very long time. She thought about Reese holding her at the funeral, whispering against her hair, "We will figure this out together, kiddo." She thought about him lifting Poppy onto his shoulders at the park, Poppy laughing, Poppy calling him uncle because Lynette had said it was okay to call him uncle. All of it had been theater. Lynette pushed the chair back, stood up, walked to the far wall, pressed her forehead against the cool concrete. She thought she would scream. She did not. Instead, she thought about Poppy, 5 years old, upstairs in the world somewhere, eating pancakes with Odessa. Alive. Real. Hers. Poppy was real. Lynette closed her eyes. Breathed. He could take her apartment. He could take her sleep. He could take her savings and her job and her dignity. He could not take her sister. He could not take who she was. She turned around, walked back to the desk, sat down, opened another file, because Ellis Marsh was gone. But he had left her a fortress, a weapon, a truth. The next file made her wish she had stopped at Reese. It was another photograph, also from the Palmer House, also time-stamped. This one was from October of 2024. 5 months after Ellis's funeral, a young woman sitting at a small table across from Emmett Vance, coffee cups between them. She was leaning forward. She was laughing. Lynette knew her. Marielle, the young lawyer who had walked into Lynette's studio apartment 3 months ago with a warm smile and a manila folder, and had said her firm handled pro bono estate work for hospital employees. Someone from Lynette's father's HR department had given her the name. She had said she would love to help Lynette get his affairs in order at no cost. Marielle had been kind. Marielle had brought coffee. Marielle had explained the paperwork slowly. Marielle had sat on the floor with Poppy and helped her color in a Disney princess for 20 minutes, while Lynette cried in the kitchen because she had just found out about the eviction. Marielle had squeezed her hand and told her that her own mother had lost their house when she was 7. She said she knew exactly what this felt like. Lynette opened the identification file attached to the photograph. Marielle Vance, 24 years old, attorney at Vance and Associates, Boston branch, second cousin of Emmett Vance, not a stranger from a firm. Family. Lynette stared at the screen for a long time. She thought about Marielle sitting on the floor coloring Cinderella. Marielle asking Poppy what her favorite color was. Marielle noticing that Poppy always tucked her little chin down when she was thinking hard, and saying, "Oh, she does that just like you." Marielle had watched Poppy for months. Marielle had noticed the chin. Vance had wanted to know what Poppy looked like when she was thinking. Vance had wanted to be able to identify her in a crowd. Lynette stood up so fast the leather chair banged backwards into the desk. "Not Poppy." She said it out loud into the concrete room. Her voice was low, not shaking, just low. "Not Poppy." She walked out of the bunker. She did not run. She walked. Up the spiral staircase, through the garage, across the wet grass, up the porch steps, into the kitchen. Odessa was standing at the counter, slicing tomatoes for a sandwich. Poppy was on a tall stool at the marble island, her legs kicking in the air. She was drawing on a piece of construction paper. She looked up when Lynette came in. Her whole small face lit up, and she called across the kitchen that Miss Odessa said they could have grilled cheese for lunch with the crust cut off. Lynette crossed the kitchen, knelt down, put both hands on her sister's small face, looked at her, really looked at her, the shape of her eyes, her father's eyes, which she now realized had been chosen for her, selected, assigned. But the light in them was her own. That was hers. That was Poppy. Lynette kissed her sister's forehead, long, slow. Her voice came out soft. She loved this little Poppy Marsh, she told her, more than the whole sky. Poppy beamed and told her she loved her more than pancakes. That was a lot. That was a lot. Lynette looked at Odessa over the little girl's head. Odessa saw her face. Odessa knew. Odessa did not say anything. She just gave Lynette a small nod and went on slicing tomatoes. That afternoon, after Poppy had gone down for her nap on the big leather couch by the fireplace, with Mr. Button under her chin and a quilt up to her ears, Lynette and Odessa sat on the porch, coffee in Lynette's hands, bourbon in Odessa's, the mountains dark against a purpling sky. The wind moved through the pines. Lynette told Odessa not all of it, some of it, the letter, her mother, Vance, Reese, Marielle, the photographs. Odessa listened without moving. When Lynette finished, Odessa took a long, slow sip of her bourbon. She had always known Ivy did not die of pneumonia. Lynette looked over. She asked how. Because Odessa had been the nurse who tried to save her. "Honey," Lynette's coffee cup froze halfway to her mouth. Ivy had come into the Cedar Falls clinic on a Thursday afternoon, Odessa told her. June 8th, 2010. Complaining of chest pains. Odessa had been on shift. She had done the intake. Ivy's vitals had been fine. Then she had collapsed. Odessa had done CPR for 31 minutes. Her voice did not shake. Her eyes did something else. Ivy had never woken up. Lynette swallowed. She asked whether Odessa had known. Odessa had suspected. She had told the doctor there were burn marks on the inside of Ivy's mouth she could not explain. He had told her she was tired, told her to go home. 2 days later, the death certificate had said pneumonia. Odessa had never signed off on it. Nobody had asked her to. She looked at Lynette. Ellis had come to her house that night. Odessa said he had sat in this exact chair. He had cried like she had never seen a grown man cry. And when he was done, he had taken her hand and told her he needed her to watch over this town, that he could not be here, that he could not let them win. Odessa's eyes filled. She had been watching this town for 15 years. Honey, for her mama and her daddy, and whoever came next. She reached over, took Lynette's hand, and whoever had come next had been her. Lynette held her hand tightly. They sat like that for a long time. The next morning, Pastor Nash Whitmore came out to the farm with 3 men from his congregation. He was 55, broad-shouldered, a retired Marine turned country preacher. His voice was low and did not waste words. He told Lynette that her father had saved his son's life. Lynette blinked and asked whether that was true. His boy, 10 years old, fell into the aquifer during a fishing trip in 2017. Ellis Marsh pulled him out, never even took off his coat, just went in February. Whitmore looked her right in the eyes and told her that if she needed them, she was to call, day or night. He put a hand on her shoulder, firm, brief. He said this town owed her family more than they could ever repay, and that she was not alone in this. Lynette could not speak. She just nodded. By the end of the week, half of Cedar Falls had come by. Millie brought apple pies. Cormac, a 70-year-old mechanic with hands like leather gloves, spent an afternoon checking the security system for free. He did not say much, just walked the perimeter, grunted twice, made notes on the back of an envelope. On his way out, he stopped at the porch and told her that a woman who could change her own oil never had to ask permission to leave a town. He tipped his cap and drove off in a truck that had probably been built the same year as the Impala. Dorothea came with a casserole. The pastor came twice more. A woman named Junia came with a stack of quilts and left without ever going inside because she said the girl needed sleep, not company. A retired judge named Callum brought a locked bag of documents he told Lynette had belonged to her mother and had been sitting in his safe since 2010. Lynette cooked for Poppy every night in her father's kitchen. She read to her every evening in the big chair by the fireplace. She started to sleep for 6 hours at a stretch, which was more than she had slept in a year. Her hands stopped shaking. She began in the smallest, quietest way to feel like a woman with 2 feet planted on the ground. She also began to prepare. She spent every afternoon in the bunker, reading files, cataloging evidence, studying the surveillance systems, learning where every camera was, every reinforced door, every emergency exit. She found a hand-drawn map in one of the drawers, her father's writing, blueprints of the farmhouse, and beneath it, in red pencil, another set of blueprints. The bunker, the tunnel, the escape route through the underground passage that came out 60 meters behind the house beneath the roots of the old oak tree. Ellis had planned every inch of this for 15 years. For her. On the 8th day, Lynette found something else. In the second drawer of the desk, underneath a stack of documents, was a cedar box. She lifted it out, set it on the desk, opened the lid. Inside were letters, 47 of them. Each one was addressed to my baby Lynette. Each one was signed. Mom. Lynette sat down. She opened the first one. September 23rd, 2002. Lynette, my little bird. She was 3 hours old. Her mother was writing this from a hospital bed in Kalispell. Her daddy was holding her right now. He had not stopped smiling since they had put her in his arms. Her mother had thought she knew what love was until this morning. Now she knew she had only been guessing. Lynette had her mother's mouth, and her daddy's chin, and her own soul that was already so completely obviously hers. Her mother promised her, whatever the world asked of her, she would not let it take her from her. She loved her. Mom. Lynette read every single letter, 6 hours underground, reading her mother's voice out of 15 years of silence. There was a letter for her 16th birthday. Her mother had written it 3 weeks before she died. It began, "My darling, you are 16 today. If your father has done what I asked, he has taken you to the diner on Halstead that has the good pancakes. He knows I would have wanted that." It ended. 16 is not old enough to know what you are made of, but it is old enough to start finding out. Start finding out slowly. There is no hurry. I will love you either way. There was a letter for her wedding day, and one for the first time she would fall in love and get her heart broken, and one for the first time she would hold her own child. There was a letter that said, "My darling, if you ever have a little sister someday, please love her the way I would have loved her. Please tell her about me. Please let her ride on your shoulders the way I used to carry you. Please read her the book about the moon." Lynette had to stop reading for a while after that one. The last letter was dated June 3rd, 2010, 5 days before Ivy died. Lynette, my darling. Yesterday she had asked her mother why she had to go on business trips so often. Her mother had told her she sold insurance. She had told her she had to visit clients. She had told her a story. Lynette was 8 years old. She was old enough to smell a lie. Her mother had seen her look at her with those steady gray eyes and had known she did not believe her. And she had wanted in that moment to sit her down on her lap and tell her everything. She could not do it because the world she moved in was not safe for a little girl to know about, and because knowing would put her in danger. So she had lied again. And Lynette had looked at her, and she had let it be a lie, and she had asked if they could bake cookies, and her mother had said yes. My darling girl, there were lies that came out of love, and there were truths that would break the world. Her mother had chosen the lie. If she had made the wrong choice, if this came out someday, if someone told her the woman she thought she knew was someone else entirely, please try to understand. There had never been a moment her mother had not loved her. There had never been a day she would not have died to keep her safe. Mom loved her. Lynette. Whatever came. Lynette pressed her mother's letter to her chest, and she said out loud into the quiet room that she understood. Mama. She understood. That night she carried Poppy up to bed, read her goodnight moon. Poppy fell asleep before the gray-green room even said goodbye to the mittens. Lynette kissed her on the forehead, sat on the edge of the bed for a long time watching her breathe. Then she went downstairs to the bunker, opened the top drawer of the desk, took out the satellite phone her father had left charged, and made her first call. To Special Agent Malcolm Ridgway. The number was on an index card in her father's handwriting. He answered on the second ring with only his last name. Lynette gave hers back. She told him she was at Silverbrook Farm. She had read her father's files. Silence on the other end. Then a long, slow exhale, like a man who had been holding his breath for 15 years. He asked if she was safe. For now. He told her not to move from that location, not to answer the door for anyone she did not know. He wanted to know if she was armed. She told him she had her father's shotgun. Good. 5 hours out. Coming. She said his name once, quietly. She asked whether he was the one her father had been working with. Ellis had been his friend for 19 years. Ridgway said, trusted him with his life, and with hers. Lynette closed her eyes, nodded even though he could not see her. She would be here. She hung up. She sat in the leather chair. She looked at the 6 monitors on the wall. Live footage, all quiet, all still. The gate, the driveway, the barn, the tree line, the porch, the kitchen, the upstairs hallway, Poppy's bedroom, small chest rising and falling under a quilt, the mountains beyond the property, dark and patient, the windmill turning slowly against the moon. Lynette put her hand on the desk. She murmured to the empty room that she was here now. Dad, Mama, and they could come and take it. She did not have to wait long. 3 hours later, 10:23 at night, the motion sensor at the front gate tripped. Lynette was in the kitchen making chamomile tea for Poppy, who had woken from a nightmare and asked for water. The alarm on her phone chirped. She set the tea down, walked to the bunker, hit the switch for the front gate camera, and froze. A black Chevy Suburban was parked outside the gate, engine running. 3 figures had gotten out. One was walking toward the intercom. Porter Ellsworth, the attorney from the phone call. Behind him, 2 men in dark tactical clothing. The intercom crackled. Lynette's phone rang. The camera system had piped the audio through. She answered. Did not speak. Ellsworth's voice came through. Formal. Careful. Something under it she could not read. He knew she was listening. His client had authorized him to make a final offer. Sign the deed. Take a check. Take her sister. Leave Cedar Falls tonight. She would be safe. Lynette stayed silent. If she did not sign within 12 hours, he told her, his client would no longer be in a position to guarantee anything. She let the silence sit for another beat. He did not want this to happen the hard way. For her father's sake, please do not make him leave her to what came next. Lynette pressed the intercom button once and told him to get off her property. The three figures stood there for a long moment. Then they got back in the Suburban. The engine revved, and they were gone. Lynette stood in the bunker alone. Her phone buzzed. A text from Odessa. Three strangers had just walked into Millie's asking after her. Odessa had played dumb. She had called Sheriff Braddock. She had also called the number her daddy had given her 3 years ago. Both the doors, honey, and listened for her. Lynette put the phone down. She walked up to Poppy's room. Poppy was awake, sitting up in bed, holding Mr. Button. Lynette knelt in front of her. She told Poppy she needed her to listen right now, and to be brave. Poppy's eyes were big, but they did not tear up. She just nodded. There were some bad people, Lynette told her, who might come to Grandpa's house tonight. She needed Poppy to come with her to a safe room downstairs. It was a special room Grandpa had built. Poppy would have water and food and a soft blanket and Mr. Button and a radio. Poppy nodded again. Lynette went on. When Poppy heard her on the radio, she might say strange things. Poppy was not to come out. Not for anything. Not for anyone. Poppy's small voice asked how she would know it was really her. Lynette smiled even though her eyes were burning. She would say a special sentence. She told her. Only she and Poppy would know it. The sentence would be, "The spring bells ring 4 times. Poppy repeated it slowly, carefully. The spring bells ring 4 times. Good girl. Lynette wrapped her in the quilt, lifted her, carried her down the stairs, through the kitchen, into the garage, down the spiral staircase, into the bunker, through the door on the far side, into a small reinforced chamber with a cot and a lantern and a radio, and enough water for a week. She tucked her sister in, kissed her forehead. She loved her more than the whole sky. Poppy Marsh. Poppy loved her more than pancakes. Linny. Lynette turned off the overhead light, left the lantern. She closed the steel door, locked it, walked back into the main bunker. She sat down in the leather chair. She looked at the map of Flathead County, somewhere in the dark on the far side of the fence line. The windmill turned, catching every signal for miles, feeding it silently into the machines around her. Her father was gone. Her mother was gone. And still they were working. Lynette reached for the satellite phone. Then she stopped. Because on monitor number 1, she saw headlights. Not the Suburban this time. Different vehicle. A dark sedan she had never seen. Coming up the driveway. Slow. It stopped 40 feet from the porch. The driver's side door opened, and Reese Halloran got out. He was wearing the same charcoal wool coat he had worn to her father's funeral. His breath fogged in the cold. He stood there for a long minute in the beam of his own headlights, looking up at the house. Then he lifted a bullhorn to his mouth. His voice came through the exterior speaker of the security system. Soft. The voice he used when he wanted something. He knew she was in there. It was just him. Lynette did not move. I knew she had seen the photograph. He knew what it looked like. But she had to let him explain. He had been trying to protect her from the beginning. He promised. He took a step forward, and he told her Poppy needed her to open this door. Something in Lynette went very still. She reached for the bullhorn microphone, then stopped. She would not answer him. Instead, she reached for the satellite phone again and dialed the number. Ridgway picked up. She told him Reese was here. How far out was he? Standing in the driveway. Alone. So far. 90 minutes out. Ridgway told her. She was not to open that door. Not to answer him. Every second she could give him. Give him! She hung up. She looked at the monitor. Reese was still standing in the driveway. Bullhorn at his side now. Face tipped up toward the second-story windows. He looked, she realized, like a man who was very sure of what was about to happen. Behind him on the road below the gate, a second set of headlights had appeared, and a third, slow, careful. Lights off as they came up the shoulder. The wind picked up. The windmill turned. 10:37 at night. The bunker was cold, bluer than Lynette remembered. The 6 monitors glowed against the concrete walls like 6 pale moons. On monitor number 1, Reese was still standing in the driveway, bullhorn at his side, his breath fogging in the beam of his own headlights. He had not moved in almost 4 minutes. He was waiting. He was very good at waiting. On monitor number 2, the second set of headlights had crested the ridge. A dark Suburban, and it stopped 40 feet behind Reese's sedan. The driver got out. Emmett Vance. Camel cashmere coat. The gold watch catching the porch light like a small, dishonest star. On monitor number 3, a third vehicle. Another sedan. A single silhouette in the driver's seat. Just sitting there. Engine idling. Not moving. Lynette watched the third car for a long moment. Then she turned back to Reese. Reese had lifted the bullhorn again. His voice through the exterior speaker was thin and warped. He knew she had called someone. That was fine. That was smart. But whoever she had called was at least an hour out, and in 1 hour a lot could happen. He paused. Poppy was very small. Lynette's hand tightened around the arm of the leather chair. She did not answer. Instead, she pulled her phone from her pocket, slid her thumb across the screen, opened the voice recorder, tapped the red circle, set the phone face down on the desk. Screen dark. Recording. Because Ellis Marsh had taught her one thing without ever meaning to. You did not fight people like this with fists. You fought them with tape. She stood up, walked to the far wall, pressed the intercom for the front porch speaker only. Not the driveway, not the whole property, just the porch. Then she keyed the mic and said his name once. Steady. Even she was surprised. His whole body eased. Just a little. There she was. Thank God. She told him to come to the front door. Alone. Leave Vance in the driveway. A pause. She watched him on monitor 1. His shoulders relaxed a hair. Because she had used his name. She had spoken his language. She had asked him to come alone. In his head, she was still the girl on the couch. He murmured something back about how Vance was not going to let him come alone. Then he was not to come. He tried her name again in that softer register. Alone or nothing. She released the button. She watched him turn. Say something to Vance. Vance did not move. Reese said something else. Longer this time. Hands moving. Vance tilted his head, then nodded once. Very slight. Reese started walking up the driveway. Lynette did not wait to watch him reach the porch. She moved. Fast now, because time was small. Up the spiral staircase, through the garage, out the side door, around the back of the house. She had walked this route in the dark twice already this week. She had counted the steps. 22 from the garage door to the corner of the porch. 19 from the corner to the propane tank. 6 from the propane tank to the small maintenance door beneath the porch that opened into the crawl space. She had oiled the hinges herself 2 nights ago. She dropped to her knees, opened the maintenance door, slid inside. The crawl space under the porch was dry and low, old cedar planks above her head. She crawled forward, 12 feet, 15, until she was directly under the front door. Above her, footsteps on the porch. Reese stopped at the door, waited. She could hear him breathing. She could also hear the driveway, which was the point. This was why her father had left this crawl space, not to hide, to listen. Ellis had built the porch as an amplifier. Every board angled to funnel voices down into the crawl space. A confession chamber under a farmhouse. 15 years of engineering for one night. Reese knocked. 3 sharp raps. Then a pause. Then 3 more. The pattern he always used. Lynette did not answer. She had never intended to answer. She just wanted him talking. I waited. Then he tried the handle. Locked. He knocked again. Then he turned and called back down the driveway. She was not opening. Vance's voice carried in from the gravel. Cold and clean. He was to try harder. Or Vance would... Reese turned back to the door. His voice softened again. That coaxing quality that had once made her feel safe on a bad night. He asked her to please just open the door. He promised nothing bad happened tonight if she just opened the door. She whispered into the cedar planks above her head. Not for him, for herself. He had called his shell company after her. He kept talking above her, trying different angles, reminding her of small kindnesses, reminding her Poppy needed sleep, reminding her he had held her when Ellis died, reminding her the world was cold. Then his voice dropped an octave. He told her Vance was not going to leave. He told her Ellsworth was dead. Lynette froze. Ellsworth had been alive at the gate less than 20 minutes ago. She heard Reese exhale above her. He kept his voice low. Except in the middle of that low voice, something twitched. A siren rose out on the county road at the base of the mountain. A truck engine came up the switchback fast, gears grinding. Reese stopped talking mid-sentence and turned. And Lynette in the crawlspace turned too, cheek pressed to the cedar, because she could hear it too. Ellsworth had not been dead 20 minutes ago, and whoever was coming up the road now was coming fast. Reese made a small, startled sound and stepped off the porch. Lynette heard his shoes hit the gravel. He called back down to Vance in a voice she had not heard from him before. Tense. Real. She crawled backward. Fast. Out the maintenance door. Around the propane tank. Along the wet grass at the edge of the driveway. She kept low. She kept quiet. She came around the front corner of the house just in time to see the truck. Old Cadillac. Silver. Beat up. Coming up the driveway with its lights off. Sliding on the last 20 feet of gravel. It skidded sideways to a stop in front of Reese's sedan. The driver's side door flung open. Porter Ellsworth. Alive. Not walking well. His suit was torn at the shoulder. His face was scraped down the left side. Something wet was soaking through his shirt front just above the belt. He half fell out of the car and caught himself on the doorframe, and then he saw Vance and Reese, and he did not stop. He staggered toward the porch anyway. Toward the house. Toward Lynette. She rose up out of the shadow at the corner of the porch. Reese saw her first. His mouth opened. Vance saw her second. His mouth did not. Ellsworth saw her third and last. His face did something she had not expected. Relief. He kept walking. Faster now, making the last 20 feet on legs that should not have carried him. Lynette moved to meet him. She was 10 feet from him when Vance drew the pistol from inside his cashmere coat. It came out smooth. It came out casual. Vance raised it in one motion and put the muzzle in line with the back of Ellsworth's head. Lynette screamed. It came out as a name, Ellsworth's name, loud enough to shake the pine needles. Ellsworth heard her. He did not turn to look. He shoved something forward out of the crook of his elbow, a dark leather notebook. It came sailing across the gravel in a low arc. The shot cracked. Ellsworth went down, face first into the gravel. The notebook slid the last 3 feet and stopped against the toe of Lynette's boot. Reese shouted something. Vance did not react to the shout. He lowered the pistol. He looked at Lynette. Lynette dropped to her knees beside Ellsworth. She rolled him onto his side the way she had rolled hundreds of patients on her ward. Airway, breathing, circulation. All three were failing. His eyes tracked her face and he tried to speak. Only a wet whisper came out. She bent low, ear almost at his mouth. He had told her his name at 6 that morning as an act of aggression. He gave her the same name now as an act of confession. Ellsworth. Porter. He had written the false will. He had written them all. 22 years. Every backdated document. Every forged signature. He had drafted them. He had sat at his kitchen table in April of 2002 with a photograph of a 2-day-old Lynette in a nursery in Kalispell, and he had told her father to sign or the girl in the photograph would not see her first birthday. He had told himself for 22 years that he had been protecting her. He had not been. He had been protecting himself, his job, his office, his salary, his name on the door, his membership at the club. And so he had gone home every night for 22 years and slept in a bed he had bought with the money for every backdated will he had drafted for Vance and every land grab he had papered. But he had told his wife tonight. That was what he wanted her to know. He had told his wife tonight on the phone before he came up here. He had told her he was going to try to fix one thing before he died. That was what he was doing right now. The notebook was the register. Every fake will. Every backdated deed. Every property Vance had taken and the family he had taken it from. His signature on every one. His confession. I was sorry. That was the last word. Not to her, to his daughter. Would she tell his daughter, when this was over, that he had been sorry? Lynette nodded once, her hand pressed to his neck. His pulse was going out under her fingers the way water leaves a bathtub when you pull the plug. She kept her hand there anyway. Ellsworth's eyes lost their focus. His mouth stayed open a moment, then his chest stopped. The gravel under him went still. Lynette did not move for 3 seconds. Then she reached out and picked up the notebook. Old leather, warm from being inside a jacket. She slid it inside her own coat, against her ribs. She rose to her feet slowly. Vance was 5 feet from her, still holding the pistol. He was looking at Ellsworth on the ground, and something on his face was not quite what she had expected to see there. Not regret, something smaller. Annoyance, like a man who had spilled coffee on a suit. He raised the pistol. Behind her, Reese was shouting his name. Emmett! Emmett, stop! Something in Reese's voice she had never heard before. Panic. And under the panic, something almost like shame. Not enough shame to matter, but enough to notice. Vance did not lower the pistol. He raised it the rest of the way. He put the muzzle in line with Lynette's face. His mouth did not move. She raised her chin. She looked back at him. For the first time in 23 years, she looked into the eyes of the man who had killed her mother. She thought she would be afraid. She was not. She was calm. She was tired. She was a nurse who had held the hand of a dying man 90 seconds ago, and she was still full of that stillness that comes over you when you have been that close to a leaving. She spoke, quiet enough that Reese had to lean forward to hear her. He killed her mother. Vance did not blink. He said one word. Yes. She waited a beat. He had made her mother the choice. Her mother had chosen the work. She shook her head once. Slow. She had not. Vance's brow moved. Very slight. Her mother had chosen her. Lynette told him. Everything her mother had done for the last 8 years of her life she had done because she wanted her daughter to grow up in a country where people could drink out of a well without dying. Vance smiled. It was small, almost pitying. He was going to pull the trigger. I did not get to pull the trigger because from the far end of the driveway a shotgun racked. The sound cut the cold night air. Sharp, clean, every head turned. At the edge of the tree line at the top of the driveway stood Odessa Fenn, 68 years old, 5'2", green flannel shirt, silver hair pulled back tight. Frank Howard's old Remington 870 braced against her small shoulder like she had been born there. She had not been carrying it earlier tonight. She was carrying it now. Behind her, stepping out from the pines, came Pastor Nash Whitmore in a marine field jacket that had been washed 100 times, a rifle low at his side. Steady. Behind Whitmore came Cormac, 70-year-old mechanic, wire thin, carrying a lever action. Winchester like a man who had known it since childhood. Behind Cormac came Sheriff Braddock, uniformed, radio crackling, sidearm drawn but at his side. Behind Braddock, 2 county deputies. Behind them, a small ragged line of headlights that had come up the driveway with the engines idled down to a whisper. Millie from the diner, Dorothea from the assessor's office, Judge Callum in his old sedan. 3 neighbors Lynette had not met yet. A woman named Junia holding a hunting rifle in the crook of her arm, the way you hold a baby. Cedar Falls. All of it. Odessa spoke once. She did not raise her voice. Buddy, down. Vance did not put the pistol down. Odessa took 2 slow steps forward. She kept the Remington on his chest. She was not aiming at his shoulder. She was not aiming to wound. She was a combat nurse who had seen 18 years of firearms wounds at a military hospital in Germany, and she was aiming at the exact anatomical location that would kill him in 90 seconds, and no field surgeon in the world would be able to save him. Vance was very still. I looked at her, at the shotgun, at the ring of headlights and neighbors, at the shape of what was arriving. He did the math the way men like him always did the math. He was slower at it than she had expected. Then very slowly, he lowered the pistol. He set it on the ground. He stepped back from it. He raised his hands. Sheriff Braddock walked forward. His shoes crunched on the frost. He kicked the pistol wide. He read Vance his rights in the same tired voice he had used in Dorothea's office at 11 that morning. The words came out like a man reading a grocery list. Emmett Vance, under arrest for the murder of Porter Ellsworth and for the murder of Ivy Marsh, and on federal charges pending from the Department of Justice, which Braddock did not intend to read out here on account of they would take 20 minutes. Vance did not resist. He did not run. He looked, for one long moment, at the windmill. The blades caught the moonlight. Turned once. Vance made a small sound. Not a word. Cormac spat once into the dirt beside the porch. That was the closest anyone in Cedar Falls came to celebrating. The deputies came forward. Cuffs. Vance's wrist went behind his back with the slow, indifferent motion of a man who had rehearsed this scenario in the mirror many times and had always believed it would happen to somebody else. Reese was still standing on the porch steps. Nobody had cuffed him yet. He looked up at Lynette. His face was smaller than she had seen it before. He was making the effort to speak. He could not quite get the volume up. He said he had not known Vance was going to hurt Ellsworth. He swore. Lynette did not answer him. She lowered the shotgun she was not carrying. She handed the notebook to Pastor Whitmore, who had come up beside her without her noticing. He took it with both hands. Careful. The way you take something from someone who has been holding it a very long time. She walked past Reese toward the porch steps. He turned, twisted. He tried her name. He tried to make her look at him. He said there was a version of this where he had been trying to help. Vance had had leverage on him. Vance had had things on him. Lynette stopped. She turned back. Not because he had earned it, because she had earned it. And she needed to say one thing while he was still sitting on a porch and not in a van. She spoke his name once. He looked up, hopeful, because he had heard his name. Poppy had had a word for him when he came over on Saturdays. He blinked. He asked which word. Uncle. His mouth opened, closed. That was the most expensive thing he had taken from her. Reese did not answer. I did not have an answer. He just sat there, and she could see, for the first time, the exact shape of the man underneath, which was smaller than she had imagined. Not evil, just small. A man who had let someone else write him a script. A man who had said his lines. A man who did not know what he sounded like from the outside until this moment. She turned back around and walked into the house. She did not look back. Behind her, the deputies got Reese to his feet and cuffed him too. He said something. She did not hear it. She did not want to hear it. She walked down the hall past the wall of photographs of herself, down through the garage, down the spiral staircase, into the bunker, through the far door, to the safe room. She keyed the lock. The steel door swung open. Poppy was sitting on the cot, Mr. Button in her lap, lantern glowing, small feet swinging 6 inches above the concrete. She looked up. Lynette dropped to her knees, pulled her sister into her arms, held her. Poppy pressed her face into Lynette's collarbone and asked in a very small voice whether the bad men were gone. Lynette nodded against her hair. She stroked her back once. She murmured that yes, both of them. Poppy went still for a beat. Then she asked, in the same small voice, whether that included the one who used to bring her cookies. Lynette closed her eyes. She held her sister tighter and pressed her lips against her hair. Even him, she whispered. He was not coming back. Poppy accepted this the way a child accepts a thing when she has decided the world is safe enough for now and does not need to ask more questions. Lynette carried her upstairs. Odessa was in the kitchen, kettle already on. She looked up when Lynette came in with Poppy on her hip. She did not ask anything. She just poured hot chocolate. Poppy climbed into a stool, started drinking it. Lynette stood at the counter, both hands flat on the marble. Then she began to shake. Not the whole body, just the hands, just the shoulders. Odessa came around behind her, put both hands on Lynette's shoulders, squeezed once. She did not say anything. Then she went back to the kettle. Because the town of Cedar Falls did not do speeches at 3 in the morning. It did hot chocolate. It did a squeeze on the shoulder. It did headlights up a driveway. That was enough. That had always been enough. Special Agent Malcolm Ridgway arrived at 4:12 in the morning. 50 years old, salt and pepper hair, a dark FBI windbreaker over a flannel shirt. He was alone. No convoy, no tactical unit, just one man in a Ford Explorer with a folder under his arm. I walked up the porch steps, took his cap off, held it against his chest. He greeted her by name and murmured that her father would have been so proud of her. Lynette did not answer. She just opened the door. They sat in the great room, fire in the fireplace, Odessa in the kitchen keeping Poppy company, Ridgway on one leather chair, Lynette on the other. He set the folder on the coffee table between them and told her there was one more thing she needed to know. He needed to be the one to tell her. She waited. Her mother had not just been a field operative. Lynette said quietly that she had read the letter. She knew Ivy had recruited her father. She nodded. She did not know Ivy had designed the entire operation. Lynette tilted her head. The operation to bring down Vance had not been begun by his agency. Ridgway said it had been begun by her mother. She had built the case file. She had identified Meridian Resource Group as the parent entity. She had traced the Cedar Falls poisonings to the Zurich accounts. She had recruited her father because she needed a forensic auditor she could trust. She had recruited Odessa because she needed a medical witness. She had recruited Dorothea because she needed someone in the county office. She had built a network, alone, over 16 years, before Lynette was born and after. He tapped the folder. When Ivy had become pregnant with Lynette, she had made one decision. She had stepped back from the field. She had wanted her daughter to have a mother who came home every night. His predecessor had granted the request. When she had died in 2010, his predecessor had closed the file. Lynette stared at him. Her father had reopened it. Ridgway nodded. The day after her funeral, he had come to them, sat in an office in Chicago, told the predecessor that his wife had started something. He intended to finish it. His daughter would never know. She would grow up thinking her mother had died of a lung infection. She would grow up in Chicago in a rented apartment with a father who worked a factory shift. She would grow up ordinary. She would grow up safe. And when he was done, when they had taken these people down, then she could decide for herself what she wanted to know. Ridgway looked at the fire for a moment, then back at Lynette. He had worked for 15 years. Ridgway said, not for revenge, for her ordinariness, so that she could grow up as a girl who did not have to know, so that when she finally did know, she would be strong enough to decide what to do with the knowing. Lynette did not cry. She had cried enough that day. She said only one thing. He had decided right. Ridgway nodded. Once, she reached for the folder, opened it. Inside was a single photograph. Ivy Marsh at 24, black turtleneck, standing in front of the Washington Monument, laughing at something the person behind the camera had said. The person behind the camera had been Ellis, Ridgway told her later. Lynette held the photograph for a long time. Then she said, very quietly, that she would like to show him something her father had wanted done with the money. 6 months later, Silverbrook Farm. Late April, the pasture was starting to turn green. The lupine had come up in patches near the fence, purple and white and pale blue. Odessa said she had not seen the lupine come in this thick since 1997. At the top of the driveway, a new wooden sign had been carved and hung between two cedar posts. Ivy's Rest, a home for young women starting over. Below the words, a small carved lupine flower. Beneath that, another line added by hand. In loving memory of Ivy Marsh, and in gratitude to the town of Cedar Falls. Lynette had used the estate settlement money to build the refuge. Not all of the estate. $5 million had gone into a trust for Poppy's education and long-term care. The $42 million mineral claim had been transferred to the federal government under a stipulation that any extraction be handled by a public trust with proceeds shared with Flathead, Lake, and Sanders counties. The clean water pocket beneath Silverbrook had been placed under permanent federal protection. Silverbrook itself had been converted. The main house was now a residence for up to 8 young women and their children at any given time. Women between 16 and 24. Women leaving violent homes. Young mothers with nowhere else to go. College dropouts who had run out of options. Girls who had aged out of foster care and had no one waiting. Women who arrived with nothing but a duffel bag and a scared face and the last of their courage. Odessa was medical director. Pastor Nash Whitmore came out on Sundays for a prayer for those who wanted one and a coffee for those who did not. Cormac ran a small workshop in the second barn teaching the women car repair. He said, and it became a saying around the property, that a woman who could change her own oil never had to ask permission to leave a town. Millie ran cooking classes on Tuesdays. Dorothea kept the books. And Lynette ran the place. She had gone back to school for her social work certification. She had also renewed her nurse aid license. She spent most of her hours on the porch, or in the kitchen, or in the garden. She was there when new women arrived, blinking in the driveway, small children clinging to their legs. She was the first face they saw. She always said the same thing, not because she had rehearsed it, because it was true, that they were safe now, that they were home now, and that they should come on in. The first arrival at the new refuge had been a woman named Callie, 22 years old, Western Oregon, broken wrist in a soft sling, a little boy of 4 hiding behind her leg. Callie had not spoken for the first 3 days. She had eaten. She had let Odessa change the dressing on her wrist. She had held her little boy against her ribs at night and stared at the ceiling. On the 4th morning, she had come downstairs and had asked, in a very small voice, if there was a way she could help in the kitchen. Millie had put a wooden spoon in her hand and had taught her how to make biscuits. On the 5th morning, Callie had laughed for the first time, at something her little boy had said about the goats. Nobody at the table had commented on the laugh. That was one of the house rules. You did not comment on a new woman's first laugh. You just let it happen and passed her the butter. The 3-story steel windmill still stood behind the house, but the antenna array inside the base had been dismantled the previous December. Federal agents had come. They had taken every wire, every server rack in the bunker beneath the garage. Every scrap of evidence Ellis and Ivy Marsh had spent 2 decades gathering. They had put it all in unmarked cases, loaded them into 2 trucks, driven them east. Vance's trial had started in February. Meridian Resource Group had been named in a federal RICO indictment 11 days after the raid. Interpol had raided their London office on a Tuesday morning. The story had broken the following weekend and had not stopped breaking for 4 months. Vance would spend the rest of his life in a federal prison in Colorado. Reese Halloran had taken a plea deal. 14 years. He had written Lynette 3 letters. She had not opened them. She had put them in a shoebox in a closet upstairs. She had not decided yet what to do with them. Maybe someday. Maybe never. That was allowed to be a question with no answer for a while. Marielle Vance had also taken a plea. 8 years. She had not written. Ellsworth had been buried in the Cedar Falls Presbyterian Cemetery. His widow had come in from Ohio for the funeral. His daughter had come too. She was 22. She had a small child of her own. After the service, she had walked up to Lynette and had explained, in a voice that shook a little, that her father had called her mother 3 days before he died. He had told her he was going to try to fix one thing. That was all he had said. He had not told them what. He had not told them where. He had said he loved them. He had hung up. Lynette had held the young woman's hand. She had told her that her father had died running towards Silverbrook, not away from it. That he had brought her a notebook that had opened 47 cases. That he had done, on the last night of his life, exactly what he had told her mother he was going to do. And that Lynette had been the one holding him when he went. Ellsworth's daughter had cried, quiet and hard, and Lynette had held her for a long time on the church steps in the cold April light. The bunker beneath the garage had been mostly emptied. The steel door was still there. The spiral staircase was still there. But the room below was small now. Just a room. A dehumidifier hummed in the corner. A single lamp. A cot. A radio. A locker of dry food and water. Lynette had kept it as a storm shelter, because Montana got storms, and because a girl who arrived with nothing sometimes wanted to know there was a place she could go where the world could not reach her, even for one afternoon. The 3 antennas had come off the windmill, in their place, on the very top, just under the weather vane. Lynette had installed a small brass bell. She had bought it from a foundry in Kalispell. She had picked it out herself. It rang when the wind was right. It rang when someone pulled the rope at the base. And it rang. Always. 4 times at dinner. The spring bells ring 4 times, because Poppy had asked her to. On a Sunday evening in early April, Lynette walked out to the top of the pasture. She was carrying a small framed photograph, the one from the Bible. Ivy pregnant, Ella smiling, the Impala in the driveway, the Victorian house behind them on the hill, the 3-story steel windmill in the corner of the frame. She reached the crest of the hill. She looked out over her land. Poppy was running through the lupine with 2 other children. Callie's little boy of 4, a little girl of 7 whose mother had arrived the previous month. Odessa was on the porch of the main house, reading a book, a cardigan around her shoulders. Callie was sitting on the porch steps with her wrist out of the sling for the first time, showing a new arrival how to snap green beans into a metal bowl. The evening bell on the windmill began to ring across the valley, 4 times. Lynette set the photograph down, propped against a small flat stone she had placed there on Christmas morning, a rock she had carried up from the creek at the far edge of her property. She had chiseled 2 names into it herself, slowly, over 3 weekends, chip by chip. Ellis, Ivy. She sat down on the grass beside it. She said out loud into the wind that she had done it. Mama, that she had done it. Daddy, that they had watched over the town, and now the town was watching over them, and that she was not afraid anymore. The wind picked up. It moved through the lupine. It moved through her hair for half a second, just half. She could have sworn she heard someone laughing, just faintly, somewhere behind her. She smiled. Then Poppy came running up the hill, cheeks pink, hair wild, Mr. Button dangling from a fist that had grown just a little bigger over the last 6 months. She called across the last 20 feet that Miss Odessa said supper was ready. Lynette stood up, brushed the grass off her jeans. She reached out. Her sister's hand slid into hers. Small, warm, real. The bell was still ringing. The sky over Silverbrook Farm was that impossible Montana blue, so wide it could swallow every sorrow you brought to it, so high it made a person feel small in the way that heals a person instead of harming her. Behind them, the 3-story windmill turned once in the wind, slow, steady. The brass bell at its top caught the last of the evening light. Lynette walked down the hill with her sister, toward the porch, toward Odessa, toward supper, toward the light in her father's house, toward the rest of her life.